All right, to get more perspective on this story, let's now go straight to Joel Whitaker, a security analyst standing by in London. Joel, thanks for joining us. Certainly a huge development on the international front. World leaders certainly weighing in with regards to what happened with the U.S. and its response to Syria, sort of Trump's first full test when it comes to international relations. What do we expect? How will this play out in the coming days?
Yeah, and Trump had to take a hard line. He was quite vocal about the previous U.S. administration not following through on a threat to retaliate from the last chemical weapons attack, if you remember, quite a few years ago. So he had to be seen to be strong, and that's what he's done. He's put in a serious missile strike onto an airbase within Syrian territory that had Russians on it, and obviously Assad's state regime as well. Now, they warned the Russians off in order to ensure that the situation didn't escalate further, certainly with Russia. But however, Russia now will seem to be taking a tough stance. After all, it is allied with the Assad regime on the ground, has provided support for the last few years for the Assad regime in Syria, and can't be seen just to back down quite so easily, I'm sure.
Joel, really quickly as well, this whole notion, the ongoing civil war there. I know you've been on the ground there in some of those areas. Very devastating pictures to take a look at. We saw some of those the children, and it just was very horrific to see sort of the aftermath of what happened. Syria, the government still says, they are not taking responsibility for it. Russia, a key ally to Syria, supporting them. They've issued a statement from the Kremlin, and then we heard just a short while ago that Void ship, which is on routine, headed to that region. But many world leaders really sort of keeping a close watch. Ultimately, though, it's the people on the ground that pay the price. I mean, is there really an end in sight? Yeah, and just to back to the beginning of that, if you look back over the years, certainly the West has been incredibly nervous about going in to deal with the threat of weapons of mass destruction, of chemical weapons, really in part due to the mistakes that were made in Iraq many years ago, where, of course, no weapons of mass destruction were found, although chemical weapons were. So they've been quite nervous. So this move is quite bold from the West, and quite bold certainly from the US, has been backed by many Western powers, and that includes the UK, feel it's an appropriate response. And so looking ahead, it will be interesting to see how it plays out between Russia and the US. All right, let me now go to Dr. Wael Awad. He's a writer and political analyst and a South Asia expert. Thank you, Dr. Awad, for joining us. We've had you on before, and certainly, this is, we were chatting just a few days back, in fact, on Gravitas, and now things have taken sort of escalated beyond a point of control. What do you make of all of this, the U.S. airstrikes and then the support now by Russia to Syria? Dr. Awad, go ahead.
Well, actually, to the assumption of the United States based on a story that there is an attack allegedly by the Syrian government on Idlib, which is controlled by IS, which is Al-Qaeda affiliated group. So if the American based their assumption on a story, not on reality on the ground, then this is, we can see it irrespective whoever carried this operation inside and killing the Syrian people, it's a crime against the humanity. But it is definitely an illegitimate, it's an aggression, it's a unilateral act by the United States, which should be also condemned in the UN Security Council, because they don't have the UN Security Council mandate to attack any country. They raised the false flag in Iraq before, and they raised it in Libya. Now they are doing it in Syria. There is no other way, because all of us knows who controls the air in Syria is Russia. And this kind of an attack is just a gesture, because it was the same Shuayrat airfield which the Syrian air defense missile have attacked the Israelis' incursions into Syrian space some time back. So to see that the Americans are really doing something to defeat or to bring down the Syrian government because of this attack allegedly on the Syrian civilian by the Syrian government is a clear indication that the United States does not really see the reality on the ground, because such kind of a skirmish or a surgical or as a gesture is just a misadventure which was flaring the operation. In fact, the attack immediately after this attack on this airfield, there was another aggressions used by the IS on the ground to take full advantage of this on the Syrian troops on that region. Similar things happened in the past when the American attacked Syrian soldiers in Deir Zor, and they say by mistake they attacked and they killed Syrian soldier. 84 people were killed in that mountain. Immediately the IS took control of that strategic hill. So I don't think the Americans are really fighting terrorism. They're basically creating chaos. And President Trump himself said that he is accusing the previous administration of being chaotic and created the chaos in the Arab world. I can see he is now party to it.
All right, we're going to come back to both of our guests in just a short while, but quick updates with regards to the story. In fact, the Pentagon had said that Russian forces were in fact notified in advance of the strike. They also said that they have taken precautions to make sure that any risk to Russian and Syrian personnel at that airbase, that is the Shayrat airbase, were taken into consideration. Monitor groups have now come back and said that 4 Syrian military personnel were killed and that the airbase was nearly destroyed. The Syrian opposition, the National Coalition, hailed the U.S. airstrikes, calling for further American action against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, as well as his military capabilities. Many world leaders have also reacted, including Israel, Britain, and Australia, welcoming the U.S. action. Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has said that he supports the U.S. airstrikes at that Syrian airbase, calling it a calibrated response as well as one that is proportionate. Let's listen in.
The Australian government strongly supports the swift and just response of the United States. This was a calibrated, proportionate and targeted response. It sends a strong message to the Assad regime.
The president took an appropriate step tonight, and this is not just symbolic. It is he took an attack against an airfield that was the airfield from which these chemical attacks were conducted against innocent civilians, and I think the president made the right move. And so obviously now it is an attack that had a strategic objective, degrading Assad's capability to continue to attack his own people with nerve agents like sarin.
Well, here's what we know this hour about that airbase and what exactly has unfolded. Still a very developing story. While the Shayrat airfield is used by both Syrian as well as Russian forces. Russians have been stationed there on the base since late 2015. The airfield, in fact, was used to launch chemical weapons as per Donald Trump. While the U.S. offensive destroyed the Syrian aircraft as well as some of the infrastructure in that area, reports also indicate that the air defenses, some of the hangars, as well as fuel that was stored there are also destroyed. Russian assets on the base were avoided during that strike. The airbase, again, is about 150 kilometers from Syria's capital of Damascus.
هذا الاعتداء لن يثنينا على الاستمرار في مواجهة الإرهاب، ولن نستغرب أن تكون أمريكا أو إسرائيل داعمة لهذا الإرهاب، بل أنها شريكة فعلية في العمل على ضرب البنى التحتية السورية وضرب الشعب السوري واستهدافه بعدة وسائل وأشكال، وهي ممارسة من ممارسات العدوان الذي استهدف سوريا أكثر من مرة.
Well, the United States National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said, quote, there was an effort to minimize the risk to the third country nationals at that airport. I think you read Russians from that we took great pains to try to avoid that. Of course, you know, any time in a military operation, there are no guarantees. There were measures put in place to avoid hitting what we believe is a storage of sarin gas there, so that would not be ignited and cause hazard to civilians or anyone else, end quote. All right, let's go back to our guest to get quick perspective on this with regards to this. Let me first start again with Dr. Avad. We saw some of the reaction there coming in from the U.S. With regards to making sure that they took proper precaution. That was a response by Trump after the horrific attack a few days ago. What is the ground sentiment that you're picking up there, Dr. Avad, with the people of Syria, the opposition hailing it? We saw many countries, Australia, Israel, Great Britain, welcoming the U.S. response, but not everybody's on that page. Dr. Avad?
I don't see any surprise in those countries, which is...
Go ahead.
There is no surprise to these actions or these reaction from those countries, because it is understood these are the allies of the United States. NATO even came forward and they have supported Saudi Arabia, which is the stooge of the U.S. policy in the region. They have come forward. Turkey also have supported this airstrike, but that doesn't give justification to the American aggression. After all, it is a unilateral decision. The decision has been taken long time ago. In fact, it is not a sudden attack. It is based on a fabricated news of the attack in Idlib. Such kind of a military operation does not require immediate just pressing a button while sitting in California. It is definitely has been well planned in advance, that the United States realized that the Syrian forces have been gaining on the ground, including the Russian and the Iranian helping them, and nobody wanted the Syrian and the Russian to end the menace in Syria. Therefore, I think this is a kind of a pressure. It's a message from the American administration that they can strike in Syria, they will strike tomorrow in Iran, and maybe later on in Moscow. So there has to be a more bright perspective in seeing the actual story behind this American attack. I don't take it as a light attacks, because the Russians have already cancelled the memorandum of understanding with the U.S. on the coordination. There is stories of more of the not all the rocket hit its targets. There are also stories of attacking some other position of the Iranian and the Russian in Syria. So if there is an escalation, I think the American will go down and calm down the Russian now, because they have injured the bear. And it could be also more so if the American does not understand that this kind of a single attack, or without even the UN Security Council resolution on this, does not solve the issue. Because if you wanted to find out who is behind the killing, who is behind this heinous crime in Idlib, you need to have an independent investigation, find out, and take them to the International Court of Justice, and we will be all happy to help you out. But such kind of action, it will aggravate, and countries supporting this action actually will realize later that what they have been done in Iraq, what have been done in Libya, is just a repetition of what's going on in Syria and in Yemen.
All right, let me go to Joel real quick. Joel, how is this, do you think, going to impact U.S. and Russia's relationship? There's been certainly a friction going on already, going back and forth with the Trump administration and Putin, even dating back to some of those election speculations. And now this with Syria, sort of really putting Trump's foreign policy into question. Now that a warship on its way there to Syria as well. How is it going to affect the relationship of those two countries after these airstrikes? Joel?
Yeah, and Putin and Russia, they have problems at home. They have problems in the Ukraine. They have funding issues in Syria, which has cost them a lot of money and continues to cost them a lot of money to bolster the Assad regime. So they actually would probably want a solution. But that said, they can't back down. They won't back down, likely, from the attack by the US on this base. But let's not forget that scores of civilians have been killed, and although it's difficult to get intelligence on the ground in an area where the chemical weapons actually dispersed or were used, it's likely that it was dropped from an aircraft. Chemical weapons, the way they dissipate, the way they're used, they need to be, they're quite delicate, actually, and they're quite difficult to use. It's unlikely that they were released by being bombed, as in they weren't in place in a bunker and that bunker was bombed and that therefore released the chemical gases. It's quite unlikely. That would more likely have destroyed the chemical sarin, if indeed it was sarin. It's very likely that it was dropped by an aircraft. And if that's the case, then it's very likely that it was Assad's regime. And so looking ahead, the rhetoric's already ramping up. Russia potentially are pulling out of the agreement that they have in Syria at the moment, which is an agreement with the US and other powers who have air superiority that they deconflict that they speak to each other. So top generals from all the forces will be in an operations room talking to each other, ensuring that they don't get what's known as a blue-on-blue military parlance, which means a friendly. They shoot down either one of their own or one of the, or even the Russians. The Americans and Russians so far avoided that. The danger is now, of course, with this upping of rhetoric between Russia and the US. If the US pull out of this agreement, there's a chance that there could be America or Russia could hit one of the other's aircraft. And so therefore we see a further escalation.
All right, Joel, thank you for those updates. Real quick, I'm going to get closing thoughts from both of you with regards to this. Let me start with Dr. Avad first. Your closing thoughts with regards to this. This has sort of been the horrific attack that took place earlier this week. 86 people right now is what the death toll stands at. Then this sort of a lack of response from Trump. Then this strike. Now world leaders are reacting. Trump and Russia. So U.S., Russia, Syria, a lot of the big political players involved. Closing thoughts, Dr. Avad. We'll start with you first.
Well, I think it is, I again reiterated what I have said earlier, whoever killing innocent people is a crime. Terrorism is you are acting a kind of an act of terrorism, but you wanted the audience far away from the actual victims to hear your version of terrorism is different from what we look at it. Both way, it is both a chaotic exercise and it is aggravating the situation, not helping the Syrian war. You want to finish the war on Syria, please bring down all the parties across the table and let us have a ceasefire and bring the Syrian people back from all over the world. That is the message should go. Such kind of aggression will only aggravate and will cause more loss of Syrian life. We are not prepared for that anymore. Enough is enough.
All right, Dr. Avad, thank you for those updates. And let me go to Joel real quick. Closing comments, Joel, sort of from a Western perspective with how all of this is going to unfold. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the Americans will continue to, if they see that chemical weapons have been used, they'll continue to strike, degrading the Assad regime's power. Russia will continue to support Assad, looking ahead likely, certainly on the face of it, but behind the scenes, perhaps Russia is talking to the Assad regime and actually attempting to de-escalate the situation. I don't believe that they want a war in the region.
All right, Joel Whitaker, security analyst, joining us from London. Dr. Avad, right here in New Delhi. We appreciate your input and your thoughts. Thank you for both of your perspectives. Real quick now, staying on this story, let's also get some reaction on how Americans have to say about the airstrikes in Syria. Let's get some ground reaction there.
It's crazy that he'll just retaliate so quick without thinking of repercussions, and I don't really think we should be doing anything over there.
I think it's a distraction from what's really facing us, which is his Russia situation.
It's kind of a, hit first before you really kind of think about what's going on, reaction, which is what I'd be concerned about.
Is the U.S. going to be, responsible for horrible things that governments doing to their own people, I guess?
Might be another way to get more peaceful resolutions, and I'm pretty sure that if we bomb them, it can drive to an escalation of even more violence in the area.